On the Gaia continent, mysterious occurrences have been troubling the land for years. Monsters have been vanishing without a trace, one by one. At first, people assumed the creatures were being wiped out, but soon it was discovered that these monsters were actually being transported to a different dimension. This strange phenomenon piqued the interest of a particular mage who has been tirelessly studying the disappearances, hoping to uncover the secrets behind them. Driven by ambition, the mage's goal isn't merely understanding the mystery, he wants to harness this power of teleportation for himself. After years of research and collecting valuable insights, he sets up a magical circle in a place known as the Great Labyrinth, a dungeon infamous for its powerful aura. With everything in place, the mage initiates the spell, carefully setting the coordinates and establishing a mana connection. With excitement and anticipation, he steps onto the magic circle, ready to teleport to the unknown dimension. As the spell activates, a blinding light envelopes him, bright enough to illuminate the entire area. But suddenly, everything halts. The mage realizes that while the air and temperature around him have indeed changed, he hasn't been transported to another dimension. Instead, it's the dungeon itself that has been teleported away, leaving him standing in a crater where the labyrinth once stood. In a different dimension altogether, a young man named Kong Jinhook finds himself staring in disbelief at an interdimensional portal that has just opened up in his attic. His day had been entirely ordinary until this bizarre event. Earlier that day, while working his part-time job, Jinhook watched the college students passing by, feeling a pang of nostalgia for his younger days. Back then, he too had dreams and passions. But now, as a low-ranked D-grade hunter, he doesn't have the luxury to pursue such ideals. As Jinhook stands lost in thought, his partner interrupts, reminding him they still have a lot of work to finish. Despite the chill in the air, Jinhook wears surprisingly light clothing. One of the minor perks of being a hunter is enhanced tolerance to extreme temperatures, a benefit even for someone of his low rank. It's a small blessing, allowing him to save money on heating back home. Although hunters possess several unique abilities, Jinhook still struggles financially. Part-time labor jobs like these are his only source of income since the major guilds have monopolized all the local hunter jobs. This has been especially problematic due to a notorious serial killer targeting top-ranked hunters. With the killer still at large, the powerful guilds have tightened their grip on available hunter work, leaving little for independent hunters like Jinhook. However, it seems to be Jinhook's lucky day. A sudden commotion echoes from the nearby school area, followed by screams. This kind of chaos could only mean one thing: monsters. If he can just take down a few, the rewards might be enough to support him for an entire year. Hopeful, he rushes over, but his optimism is shattered almost instantly. As he arrives on the scene, a man roughly shoves him back while a group of elite hunters arrives, each bearing the insignia of Titan, the guild that controls this territory. In an instant, they take command of the situation, and Do-hyun, the guild's deputy leader, sneers at Jinhook, ordering him to get lost unless he wants trouble. The message is clear: there's no place here for a lowly D-rank like him when top-tier A-rank hunters are involved. Outmatched and powerless, Jinhook can only watch as his chance for glory slips away yet again. Defeated, he drags himself to his next part-time job, hoping at least this will help him scrape by. Later, he returns home, weighed down by the bitter taste of failure. But as he steps inside his apartment, a strange noise from deeper within catches his attention. Following the sound, he discovers something extraordinary: a portal has opened up in his attic, leading to another world filled with monsters. The creatures on the other side don't seem to notice him, and he realizes he can move through the portal without any unusual effects on his body. His heart races. This might just be the opportunity he's been dreaming of. He heads downstairs to clear his mind and assess the situation. This portal appears to be a dungeon, something he's only ever heard about in theory. And while he would have been thrilled to see it anywhere else, fate had dropped it right in his own attic. He considers reporting the discovery to the Hunter Association, but that would mean losing his apartment for who knows how long, as they'd surely seize it for on-site investigation. His only viable option is to keep the portal a secret and take advantage of it himself. First, he needs to verify whether the monsters can cross into his world or if they're confined to the dungeon dimension. At least, he thinks, they can't see him yet, a small relief given his limited abilities. Realizing he could only handle 2 or 3 goblins at most, Jinhook knows that if more monsters appeared, he'd stand no chance. With nothing to lose, he takes a deep breath and steps through the portal, emerging onto the first floor of a dungeon maze. He barely has time to get his bearings before a goblin charges at him from the left. He quickly dodges back into the safety of his attic, watching as the goblin swings wildly at the air, looking confused. It becomes clear, they can't see the portal, and more importantly, they can't pass through it. Now that he's confirmed the portal's one-way protection, he feels a surge of confidence. Armed with a baseball bat, he steps back through the portal, ready to take on the goblin head-on. With a swift swing, he smacks the goblin in the cheek, sending it flying. He follows up with a powerful jab to its chest, and with one final blow to its face, the goblin collapses, defeated. This is his first time hunting monsters alone, and since he doesn't have to share experience points, they're all his. His level, stagnant for the past 3 years, finally goes up. Not only that, but the goblin's corpse is his for the taking, and he recalls that a goblin body could sell for as much as 3 million won if he finds the right buyer. The next day, Jin-hook heads to a hunter's market, looking to cash in. He approaches a merchant and tries to sell the goblin's body. The merchant examines it closely, quickly realizing that Jin-hook lacks experience in dungeon hunting. His handling of the goblin has slightly lowered its market value. Despite this, Jin-hook manages to secure a price of over 3 million won, just as he hoped. However, there's a catch. To finalize the payment, he's required to provide the location where he hunted the goblin. This is something Jin-hook can't afford to reveal. If word got out about a hidden dungeon in his attic, his profits, and his secret advantage, would vanish. Realizing he's in over his head, Jin-hook tries to find a way to extract himself from the tense situation. Just then, a group of hunters from the Black Dragon Guild storms into the market, angered that someone has been hunting in their territory without permission. They initially accuse Jin-hook, but the merchant redirects their wrath toward a blonde-haired hunter nearby who's unaware of the approaching danger. The Black Dragon hunters confront the man, accusing him of poaching on their grounds and even hinting that he might be the serial killer they've been hunting for. Before he can protest, they beat him until he can barely move, then drag him outside for further interrogation. Watching the brutal scene unfold, Jin-hook realizes how close he was to being in the blonde hunter's shoes. Knowing that he can't lie about where he got the goblin without risking the same fate, he decides against selling it here. He needs to find a safer way to make money without running into territorial guild thugs. With that thought, he heads back home, determined to get stronger and make the most of his secret dungeon without interference. Once back at his apartment, Jin-hook prepares to dive deeper into the dungeon. He equips himself with a teleportation stone that will bring him back to his apartment in an emergency, a monster tracking compass with a 50-meter range, and his trusty baseball bat. With these tools in hand, he steps back through the portal for a leveling up session. Inside the goblin labyrinth, he begins a relentless killing spree, taking out goblin after goblin, each kill boosting his level. The dungeon's filled with goblins, making it an ideal training ground for a low-level hunter like him. After a long day of hunting, his inventory is nearly full. He has room for just one more goblin, and he'd prefer if it was a large one for a bigger payout. The compass shows a goblin approaching, so he hides around a corner, ready to ambush. When the figure rounds the bend, he swings his bat, only to realize he hasn't hit a goblin. Instead, he's struck a short, stout man who looks angrily up at him. The man yells in a strange language, clearly furious, and Jin-hook hastily bows an apology. This seems to calm the man somewhat. The stranger, a dwarf, a mythical creature Jin-hook thought only existed in fantasy novels, fumbles in his bag and hands Jin-hook a necklace. As soon as he puts it on, Jin-hook can understand the dwarf's words. The dwarf scolds him for the surprise attack but eventually calms down as Jin-hook helps him gather the items that were scattered in the commotion. Each item looks high quality, though Jin-hook barely has time to admire them as the dwarf continues to berate him. Then, the dwarf notices Jin-hook's bat. He picks it up, inspecting it closely, and demands to know where Jin-hook found such a weapon. Jin-hook is confused. To him, it's just an ordinary aluminum bat. But the dwarf insists it's made from orichalcum, a rare and precious metal, and offers to trade Jin-hook some of his rare items in exchange. Seeing no reason to refuse, Jin-hook agrees and follows the dwarf back to his workshop. Once there, the dwarf takes the bat into the back, leaving Jin-hook to look around the workshop filled with impressive weapons. He's still wondering what to choose when the dwarf returns, holding Jin-hook's bat, except now it's glowing a bright red and radiating a slight shimmer. The dwarf explains that this glow is a trait of orichalcum. It starts as a soft metal but becomes incredibly strong when enchanted. Hearing the word enchanted, Jin-hook's interest peaks. Enchanted items are rare, typically only dropping from high-level monsters of A grade or higher. Testing a few swings, Jin-hook realizes the bat feels completely different, almost as if it's transformed. He opens his status menu to check the new stats. the bat is now classified as a legendary weapon, with S-grade durability and an automatic retrieval feature. Jinhook's once ordinary aluminum bat had transformed into a rare, legendary item after being enchanted by the dwarf. Now boasting the automatic retrieval ability, it was bound to him permanently, making it impossible to sell. While he couldn't make a direct profit from the bat, its immense power made it a priceless asset in combat. Luckily, he still had a full inventory of goblin corpses that he could sell for a decent amount of money. The only issue was finding a place to sell them without attracting unwanted attention from the major guilds. His only option was the Hunter Industries black market, where no questions were asked, and monster corpses were dealt with discreetly. Remembering the business cards he'd collected over time, he picked one up and used the contact information to locate a black market dealer. The address seemed shady, but Jinhook had no other choice. As he searched for any sign of the market, a man called out to him from above, introducing himself as Deputy Cho Hyung-il and inviting him up to meet their boss. Inside, Jinhook met Lee Junchul, a loan shark disguised as a loan agent who also dabbled in trading monster corpses on the black market. Junchul asked to inspect the goods before discussing payment. When Jinhook brought out his haul, the two men were shocked by the number and quality of the goblin corpses. Despite being a newcomer, Jinhook had managed to gather nearly 20 goblin corpses in perfect condition. The heads were a bit bashed up from his bat, but otherwise, the corpses looked pristine. Deputy Cho was visibly thrilled at the prospect of getting such high-quality loot. They were in the middle of negotiating prices when chaos erupted. Someone ran in to announce that a monster had appeared nearby. Apparently, laying out 20 fresh goblin corpses in one spot had attracted some unwanted attention from stronger creatures. Worse still, the monsters that showed up were two orcs, far beyond Jinhook's current level. Realizing he was in deep trouble, he quickly tried to pack up and escape, but it was already too late. One of the orcs charged toward him, looking ready to tear him apart. As the orc swung its battle axe, Jinhook narrowly dodged the first blow, but the second swing was aimed directly at his head. Just as it seemed like he was done for, his enchanted bat materialized from his inventory and blocked the attack, sending the orc stumbling backward. The bat's presence detection effect had activated, responding instinctively to protect him. With newfound confidence, Jinhook tightened his grip on the bat and prepared to fight. The orc charged again, but Jinhook was ready this time. He aimed a brutal swing at the orc's knee, causing it to lose balance. With the creature disoriented, he followed up with a powerful strike to its face, snapping its neck and killing it instantly. Just that one kill caused his level to skyrocket from 24 to 36, a massive boost in power. Before he could fully process the gain, the second orc charged at him. Jinhook quickly dodged the attack, slipped behind the orc, and smashed his bat into its back, finishing it off with a blow to the head. In mere seconds, Jinhook had taken down both orcs, showcasing just how powerful his enchanted weapon really was. With the danger past, he turned to the black market dealers, smirking as he suggested they resume negotiations, and to include the two freshly killed orcs in the deal. Impressed by his skill, the men agreed, and Jinhook managed to negotiate a 15% bonus on top of the standard market price. When he checked his bank account later, he was almost in disbelief at the amount he'd earned. With the goblin corpses taken care of, Jinhook could finally focus solely on leveling up and hunting. Having saved the black market dealers during the orc attack, they agreed to continue doing business with him in the future. He knew he would never have to worry about selling monster corpses again. He'd proven his worth to them, and they saw him as more than just a low-level thief hawking stolen corpses. To them, he was now a capable hunter, strong enough to take down two orcs with minimal effort. But he also realized that, even with his enchanted bat, he'd need better equipment to tackle higher-grade monsters if he wanted to continue his ascent. So, Jinhook came up with a plan. The next day, he showed up at the dwarf's workshop with a crate full of beer cans and alcohol. If the dwarf loved aluminum so much, then a crate of it would be like striking gold. As expected, the dwarf's eyes lit up at the sight of the crate filled with what he believed was orichalcum. He eagerly grabbed a beer and took a big swig, only to spit it out immediately, disgusted by the taste. Jinhook quickly handed him some soju instead, which finally seemed to satisfy the dwarf. But, it turned out the dwarf was still looking for something with a bit more kick. Seizing the opportunity, the dwarf proposed a trade. In exchange for the gear Jinhook wanted, the dwarf would send him on a quest, to mine some mithril or from a deeper level of the labyrinth. Jinhook knew that mithril was rare and valuable, but what did it have to do with alcohol? He didn't ask. Free gear was on the line, and he wasn't about to turn it down. If mining Mithril was the price, then he'd do it. With his mission set, Jinhook delved further into the labyrinth and soon found himself in a forest clearing. This place was much larger than he'd expected. A system menu popped up in front of him, notifying him that he'd reached the second floor of the labyrinth. It also offered him the chance to record his current location as a warp point, a concept he wasn't familiar with, but he accepted the option without hesitation. In response, a portal opened up, linking the first and second floors and allowing him to travel between them easily, just like a checkpoint in a video game. Once everything was set, Jinhook continued deeper into the labyrinth to find the Mithril ore. The second floor, aptly named Dogs and Skeletons, was filled with monstrous hounds lunging at him from every angle. Fortunately, these dogs were nowhere near as strong as the orcs he'd faced, so he tore through them without breaking a sweat. Each kill brought in free experience, and by the end of the encounter, he'd taken down 25 monster dogs and collected their corpses. Given their market value, he estimated they'd fetch him around 200 million won. But he couldn't afford to get too excited, he still had a mission to complete. Pressing onward, he encountered the second type of monster on this floor, skeletons. True to the floor's name, these animated bones were a different kind of challenge. Skeletons couldn't be sold for money, and they only went down if he shattered their core, making them more tedious to fight. To make matters worse, there were a lot of them, each shambling toward him with hollow, soulless eyes. Even with his newfound skills, the fight was exhausting, and he started to realize that the dwarf had probably sent him here to avoid dealing with these bothersome creatures himself. Despite the grind, there was one big upside to this battle. By the time he defeated the last skeleton, Jinhook had reached level 100. This was a major milestone. It meant he was now eligible to choose a new class. According to the system, his class would be determined automatically based on his fighting style and past actions. Given the aggressive nature of his recent battles, he figured he'd likely end up with a warrior or berserker class, something that suited his all-out, relentless fighting style. After gathering the Mithril ore, he'd return to the dwarf, who was genuinely surprised to see him alive. The dwarf had been sure that the monsters would be too much for him, but here he was, exhausted but triumphant, with a handful of extra Mithril ore stashed away in his inventory for good measure. Impressed by his perseverance, the dwarf agreed to use some of the ore to craft anything Jinhook wanted. Since he already had his powerful, enchanted baseball bat, Jinhook decided that armor was the next logical step. He needed something lightweight yet durable enough to withstand attacks from stronger monsters. The dwarf listened carefully and got to work immediately, hammering away with a focus that left Jinhook feeling hopeful. The process was more time-consuming than he anticipated, so he headed home to rest and recharge. Several hours later, Jinhook returned to the workshop, excited to see the final product. The dwarf presented him with a custom-made mithril chainmail, designed to fit comfortably under his shirt and hoodie. It was light, flexible, and virtually undetectable, but the dwarf assured him it was as strong as steel. To prove his point, the dwarf suddenly swung a hammer at Jinhook's chest without warning. Jinhook barely flinched, the chainmail absorbed the entire impact. What would have broken ribs on any normal person was reduced to a harmless tap, all thanks to his new armor. With the combination of the legendary baseball bat and this incredible armor, Jinhook felt his combat abilities had reached a whole new level. Meeting this dwarf really was the stroke of luck he'd been hoping for. But the dwarf wasn't done surprising him. Next, the dwarf brought out a large barrel filled with soju. It was the same batch Jinhook had given him earlier, but storing it in a barrel crafted from mithril ore had apparently transformed it. When Jinhook took a sip, he was blown away by how smooth and rich the flavor had become. It was like no soju he'd ever tasted. This incredible discovery gave him an idea. Eager to make the most of his newfound resources, Jinhook contacted the black market dealer once again, offering a new deal. This time, he wouldn't just be selling monster corpses, he'd also be providing high-quality, mithril-aged liquor. In another location, an intense battle against the lizard men continues. The Tyrant Guild members are barely holding their ground, exhausted from the seemingly endless waves pouring through the anomaly gate. The deputy guild master, Andon, refuses to call for reinforcements, unwilling to let his pride take a hit. But the situation is dire. The sheer number of lizard men pouring through is overwhelming, and the fighters are struggling to keep up. Meanwhile, Jinhook is in an entirely different part of town, celebrating a recent promotion from D rank to C rank and officially registering as a cleric, a rare class, particularly sought after by high-level guilds. This new rank brings with it fresh opportunities for him, and he's already envisioning a brighter future. Suddenly, a bloodied hunter bursts into the room, frantically searching for a cleric to heal injured Titan Guild members who are battling the lizard men. Without a second thought, Jinhook volunteers, eager to prove himself in his new role. He's escorted back to the battlefield where Titan Guild members are barely managing to fend off the waves of monstrous attackers. Jinhook is assigned to the back line with the other clerics and instructed to focus on healing. Though he wants to jump into the fray, the guild member reassures him that simply providing healing support will be enough. But as the waves of lizard men keep coming, the clerics quickly find themselves struggling to keep up, and one of them suggests they might need to call for backup after all. Then, something unexpected happens. A hostile presence suddenly appears behind Jinhook. His enchanted bat, with its automatic retrieval ability, materializes just in time to deflect a strike aimed directly at him. One of the lizard men has somehow managed to sneak past the front lines and is now attacking the back, targeting the defenseless clerics. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Jinhook quickly informs the other clerics that their defense line has been breached. If the lizard men manage to take out the healers, the entire guild could fall. With no other option, Jinhook grips his bat and takes a defensive stance, instructing the clerics to continue healing while he handles the lizard men. Though they're skeptical, the other clerics reluctantly agree, fearing that Jinhook, whom they assume is just an ordinary healer, won't stand a chance. But Jinhook surprises everyone, rushing forward with determination and swinging his bat with precision. His first hit sends the attacking lizard man flying backward, demonstrating his unexpected combat prowess. As more lizard men slip through the breach, Jinhook steels himself and charges to meet them head-on. He's nervous. Fighting this many monsters alone is no easy feat, but he knows he's the last line of defense for the healers. Despite his fear, he holds his ground, skillfully knocking back the monsters one by one. At one point, a lizard man manages to slip past his guard and lunges toward one of the other clerics. Jinhook reacts instantly, leaping forward to intercept the creature mid-attack, stopping it just before it can reach its target. His quick movement leaves him open to a stab from behind, but thanks to the dwarf's mithril chainmail, the blow barely affects him. The lizard man is stunned that its attack had no effect, giving Jinhook an opening to retaliate with a powerful swing to its face, taking it down. With Jinhook handling the backline defense, the other clerics are able to focus fully on their healing duties, supporting the exhausted guild members on the front lines. His presence not only boosts their morale but also the lizard men freeze in place, their attention drawn to a new figure stepping into the fray. A powerful figure joins the battle, taking out a lizard man with a single blow. It's Seo Sangho, the guild master of Titan and an S-rank hunter of legendary renown. Jinhook doesn't recognize him, surprising the clerics, who know Sangho's reputation well. Jinhook finally understands that S-rank hunters are in a different league. Being near Sangho feels like standing next to a force of nature. His power is almost overwhelming. Sangho acknowledges Jinhook's efforts, asking if he was the one who held off the monsters. Jinhook admits that he did his best. Sangho, impressed, promises to reward him once the battle ends. But he rushes off to join the front line, his presence instantly lifting the spirits of the Titan members. They finally feel they have a chance at victory. The only one not pleased is Andon, the deputy guild master, who sees Sangho's intervention as an insult. Andon's pride flares at the idea he couldn't handle it alone. Sangho, however, takes command, barking orders and organizing the hunters. With the guild members clear, Sangho slams his weapon into the ground, creating a shockwave that blasts back the surrounding lizard men. His single strike wipes out many monsters at once. With him leading the charge, the remaining lizard men are quickly defeated, and the horde is cleared in minutes. Sangho then turns to Andon, furious. Grabbing him by the jacket, he demands, "What were you thinking? You risked your team's lives just to handle this alone. Was your pride worth their lives?" Andon stammers, saying he was trying to protect the guild's reputation, but Sangho isn't buying it. He knows Andon's choice was driven by ego, not duty. The two lock eyes in a tense stare-off until one of the guild members reminds the guild master to dismiss the clerics who helped clear the scene. Taking a deep breath, the guild master calms himself and addresses the hunters, personally thanking everyone, especially Jinhyuk, who played a key role in ensuring so many people survived. As a gesture of gratitude, he offers Jinhyuk a spot in the guild, allowing him to bypass the usual registration process. But this offer doesn't sit well with Andon, who steps in to downplay Jinhyuk's achievement, calling him nothing more than a lucky, former D rank. Sang-ho, however, immediately defends Jin Yuk, pointing out that it was precisely this mere D rank who saved countless lives through his determination. Turning to Andon, Sang-ho forces him to apologize to Jin Yuk, a blow to the deputy guild master's pride. Even after receiving the apology, Jin Yuk respectfully declines the offer, stating he has no interest in joining any guild that allows someone like Andon to hold authority. At this, Andon's composure shatters. Enraged, he charges at Jin Yuk with an enhanced punch, but Jin Yuk swiftly counters with a defensive bat to the stomach, knocking Andon out cold. The incident doesn't go unnoticed and makes headlines the very next day, with Jin Yuk hailed as the hero who not only saved lives but also put the arrogant Andon in his place. The higher-ups at the Titan Guild are furious about Andon's humiliation. Not only was he publicly embarrassed by a C rank, but he was also stripped of his position as deputy guild master. They demand that Kong Jin Yuk, the C rank responsible, explain himself. However, Sang-ho staunchly disagrees. He argues that Andon risked the lives of guild members for his pride and attacked someone who fought for the guild, which more than justifies his demotion. With Sang-ho's logic shutting down any objections, the Titan Guild members reluctantly back down. Meanwhile, the guild master is captivated by Jin Yuk's potential, recalling the remarkable display of skill he'd witnessed. Determined to have Jin Yuk join his guild before he becomes even stronger, the guild master begins strategizing. Jin Yuk, however, is unconcerned with guild politics. Lounging in his apartment, he reviews his recent expenses, realizing he's splurged a bit since making money from hunting. Had he anticipated the expenses, he might have accepted the extra pay the Titan Guild offered, but he brushes it off. He has a more profitable plan. After resting, he returns to the dungeon to collect monster corpses, aiming for bigger prey now that his skills have improved. Venturing deeper than usual, Jin Yuk encounters a small army of orcs. An orc tries to ambush him, but he sidesteps, retaliates, and defeats it in a single blow. Surrounded by a dozen more, Jin Yuk stands his ground, taking them down with ease, totaling 20 orc corpses. This haul should cover his expenses for a year. With stamina left, he descends to the third floor, the Temple Guardian's labyrinth. The area is eerily calm, until a violent tremor shakes the ground, and a giant stone hand bursts up beneath him. He barely dodges as a massive stone golem rises, its attack swift and forceful, knocking him back with each blow. While the golem's strength is formidable, it lacks intelligence, allowing Jin Yuk to land a powerful strike on its head, shattering it. However, to his shock, the golem begins reforming. He recalls that to truly defeat a golem, one must destroy its core. As he tries to retreat to strategize, the golem regenerates quickly, grabbing him before he can escape. In a desperate moment, an arrow suddenly pierces the golem's chest, and Jin Yuk seizes the chance, striking with his bat and shattering the core. The golem collapses, defeated once and for all. After surviving thanks to a stranger's well-aimed arrow, Jin Yuk turns to thank his savior. But he's taken aback when he sees, not the dwarf he expected, but a striking woman with unusual, pointed ears, an elf. He bows in gratitude, but she quickly grabs him by the collar, pulling him close. She questions him intensely, her voice sharp, as she demands to know who he is and why he's in this dungeon. Her unfamiliarity with his world is clear, everything about him looks strange to her. After a barrage of questions, she finally lets him go when he mentions entering the dungeon today. Realizing he knows the way out, she pushes him to the ground, drops her bow, and declares she's found her escape. Jin Yuk is confused and demands to know why she's so aggressive, but she dismisses his question, insisting he guide her to the exit. Though unimpressed by her attitude, he decides to let it slide. She is, after all, quite stunning. She introduces herself as Lucia, a half-elf and a renowned platinum-ranked mercenary, claiming he should have heard of her. When she flashes her badge as proof, Jin Yuk is still clueless, much to her annoyance. To her, his lack of recognition hints he's from a remote area. When he says he's from Seoul, Korea, she's the one who looks baffled. She realizes that a mage from her world might have successfully cast a dimensional spell, bringing this dungeon into his realm. According to her, reversing the magic should return the dungeon to its origin. This revelation unsettles Jin Yuk. If the dungeon disappears, he could lose his valuable hunting grounds. He asks if she plans to send it back immediately, but Lucia admits it's beyond her current ability. However, there's a hidden room on this floor that could help. She requests his help reaching the hidden room, promising to reward him in return. Intrigued by both the reward and the mystery, Jin-hyuk agrees, and together they navigate through the dungeon. On their way, they encounter orcs, and he gets a taste of Lucia's combat prowess. Jin-hyuk realizes she's much stronger than he initially thought. The arrow she fired earlier was no joke either. If he were to fight her here, he'd be at a disadvantage. His best option is to cooperate for now and keep assessing the situation. After some more walking, they decide to rest at a safe spot. Jin-hyuk had packed some chocolates for emergencies, so he hands her one to eat. She instantly loves it and demands more. After eating through his entire supply, she still wants more, but he explains that's all he had. She accepts this, satisfied enough to continue their journey. Eventually, they reach a large chamber holding the dungeon boss. Lucia suspects the mage's spell might be connected to this room. To investigate further, they'll need to defeat the boss and clear the area. She tells him he won't need to do much, just help her finish it off once she weakens it. As they open the door, the monster lets out a furious roar and charges. Lucia quickly draws her bow, aiming straight at its chest. She tells Jin-hyuk to watch closely, then uses a technique called aura to amplify her attack's power. The arrow strikes the boss, knocking it flat on its back. One shot was enough to stun the massive armored creature. This aura technique is what she plans to teach him, but first, he has to finish off the boss while it's down. Like with the golems, he'll need to aim for the core to defeat it. Jin-hyuk jumps onto the fallen monster's chest, smashing his bat where he thinks the core is. One hit doesn't do the trick, and a huge fist swings at him from the side. He barely blocks it with his cleric skill, Holy Shield, then uses the momentum to leap back onto its chest. If one strike isn't enough, he'll just keep smashing it until it stops moving. Finally, he breaks the core, and the creature collapses in defeat. His level rises again, almost reaching 200. With the boss defeated, he turns to Lucia and asks her to teach him aura. She points out that he's already using it. His Holy Shield skill transformed his cleric power into aura. To him, it was just a class skill, but she's unfamiliar with that concept. Jin-hyuk realizes that if he can already use skills like Holy Shield, he might be able to learn how to wield aura faster than she expected. With his potential, he could even start enhancing his attacks with aura right away, but there's a condition. Lucia sends him back to the city to get more chocolates for her. Meanwhile, Sango, the Titan Guild master, is walking with his secretary, Lee Hyena, discussing a new anomaly that appeared near Gangnam Station. It was detected yesterday, giving them about 5 days to prepare before a powerful monster emerges. Sango knows his guild won't be able to handle it alone, but with the major guilds deployed overseas, the Titan Guild is the only one left in Korea. Hyena promises to search for local freelance hunters, though none seem reliable. Sango, however, already has his eye on someone, and as fate would have it, he spots Jin-hyuk across the street. Excusing himself from his secretary, Sango catches up to Jin-hyuk, who's carrying a large box of snacks for the elf. Sango offers him another invitation to join Titan Guild, but Jin-hyuk still declines. Sango then suggests hiring him as a mercenary instead. That way, he can work with the guild without officially joining, and the rewards are substantial. Jin-hyuk agrees to think about it and heads back to the dungeon with the snacks. When he presents the snacks to Lucia, she eagerly devours them, clearly enjoying these treats that don't exist in her world. After her meal, Jin-hyuk asks why she's still in the dungeon now that they've defeated the boss. She points to a magic circle on the ceiling, explaining that it connects her dungeon to his world. She'll stay here for now to study it, but if he wants to learn more about aura, he'll have to bring her more chocolates. With her snack finished, Lucia grabs his hand to begin his aura training. She channels her aura into his body to give him a feel for it, and Jin-hyuk immediately senses the surge of power. Lucia, too, notices his impressive capacity for aura, even more than she'd anticipated. She believes he'll be able to grasp the basics by the end of the day and asks if he can remember the flow of aura in his body. He confidently says yes, and she acknowledges his potential. Rather than studying the magic circle right away, Lucia decides that training him in aura through real combat will be faster. She leads him to a different area of the dungeon and throws him into a horde of monsters. Jin-hook battles an army of goblins and kobolds, managing to hold his ground while collecting their corpses. Frustrated, he asks Lucia why he suddenly has to fight a horde when she was supposed to be teaching him aura. She explains that experiencing real combat is the best way to learn aura. Although she infused him with some mana to give him a feel for it, he needs to sense the rest on his own. Just as he's processing her explanation, the ground shakes, and a stone golem emerges, roaring as it shoves Jin-hook back. Lucia tells him that facing a true crisis will unlock his potential. All he has to do is focus and try to feel the holy power emanating from his shield skill. The shield is made from aura, so once he gets a feel for it, he should be able to master it quickly. But that's easier said than done. Jin-hook doesn't consciously activate Holy Shield, so how is he supposed to feel any aura from something that triggers automatically? The golem brings down a massive fist, and Jin-hook blocks it with Holy Shield again. This time, though, he feels something, an energy gathering around his left hand, the one activating the skill. This must be what holy power feels like. The monster pulls back and strikes again, and Jin-hook summons the Holy Shield once more. Except this time, it has a different shape and feels slightly altered. This must be mana. Before he can fully process these sensations, the golem smashes down on the shield, sending Jin-hook flying backward. From her perch, Lucia mocks him, saying she told him to master his skill, not make clumsy mistakes. But he's only doing what she instructed. As he braces for the next attack, a status window appears before him. He has unlocked a new skill, Holy Power Application. This ability allows him to channel holy power to enhance his attacks and defenses, depending on how much energy he uses. This revelation shows him that skills can be acquired beyond simple class upgrades. Lucia notices him distracted and decides to step in, thinking a golem might be too challenging while he's learning to use aura. She offers to finish the fight herself, but Jin-hook quickly gathers himself and waves her off. Now that he understands his new powers, he's confident he can handle things on his own. Jin-hook charges at the golem, leaping off the ground just as a massive stone fist hurtles toward him. While in midair, he channels his mana into the bat, gaining extra momentum with a front flip, and then brings the mana-charged bat down onto the golem's head. The monster stumbles, but he's not done yet. Landing on its chest, he focuses again, pouring even more mana into his bat before smashing it directly onto the golem's core, unlocking a new skill called Holy Aura in the process. With this new power, he strikes the core with precision, successfully shattering it. The skill unlocks additional abilities, including Precision Strike and Unyielding, thanks to Lucia's intense training. She's astonished at how quickly he's learned to wield aura in combat, far faster than she'd expected. She thought she'd just teach him the basics, but now she's determined to see this training through to the end. To test his skills further, Lucia pulls out an arrow and fires it at a nearby wall, collapsing it and revealing an even larger horde of monsters. Jin-hook sighs but readies his bat, prepared for another round. After a grueling fight in the dungeon, he heads to the black market to sell the monster corpses, utterly exhausted. Jun-chul, the black market boss, notices his worn-out state as they negotiate. Jun-chul also mentions the traditional artisan soju that Jin-hook sold him last time. It's become wildly popular, with orders pouring in. With enough potential profit from the soju alone, Jin-hook realizes he might never have to worry about money again. Finally, he heads home, collapsing into bed and immediately passing out from sheer exhaustion. Not long after, he's abruptly awakened by a blaring disaster alert. The automated voice warns civilians to evacuate. The monster invasion has arrived early this month. Normally, these invasions happen randomly, but there's one that recurs every month. Usually, Jin-hook would use these invasions to hunt low-level monsters for some quick cash, but he's too tired this time. The big guilds can handle it, he figures. That plan changes when a notification pops up on his phone. Rewards for defeating monsters are now tripled due to the emergency. Tempted by the increased bounty, he heads outside, hoping to bag a few monsters for easy money. Meanwhile, the Tyrant Guild is struggling against a seemingly endless wave of monsters. Sango, the guild master, is running low on stamina, and despite appearances, the guild members are nearing their limit. Lee Hyena, the guild secretary, watches anxiously. She knows the guild could use another strong hunter to turn the tide, and she remembers someone Sango once considered promising. She calls Jean Hook, who's in the middle of fending off goblins, and offers him a job fighting alongside the Titan Guild. He haggles for 5 times the usual compensation, and they agree to meet to finalize the details. When they meet, she counters with 4 times the compensation, and he reluctantly agrees, receiving a tracker to record his kills for accurate payment. With a fair deal in place, Jean Hook heads into the fray, eager to prove himself and earn his pay. Hyena watches him leave, wondering if he'll live up to Sango's high expectations. He once took down Andon by what seemed like luck, but his true skill level remains uncertain. Arriving on the battlefield, Jean Hook goes straight for a rampaging ogre, taking it down with a single strike and shocking everyone around him. The onlookers assume he's at least an A rank, but Jean Hook believes he's even stronger than that. Thanks to Lucia's training, he's now at level 200, and with over 1,500 mana potions stocked up, he's ready to take on anything that crosses his path. Elsewhere, Andon is fighting alongside his guild members when he notices the monster numbers decreasing. He turns to see a crowd watching someone dispatch monsters with ease and realizes, to his frustration, that it's Jean Hook. Infuriated by the sight, Andon orders his hunters back into the fight, but he can't shake the memory of his previous humiliation. Determined to put Jean Hook in his place, Andon charges at him, hoping to settle the score. But Jean Hook notices him coming, counters his attack with ease, and sends Andon flying, knocking him out cold once again. Meanwhile, Sango faces a rampaging minotaur, nearly out of mana and stamina. Just as he contemplates retreating to recover, the minotaur raises its club for a powerful strike. Suddenly, a voice calls out, and Jean Yuck leaps in, grabs the minotaur by its horn, and slams it to the ground in one move. A C-rank hunter taking down a minotaur in one hit, Sango realizes his judgment about Jean Yuck was spot on. After the fight, Sango approaches Jean Yuck to thank him, but Jean Yuck waves it off, explaining the guild master promised a substantial reward, so thanks weren't necessary. Sango uses this opportunity to urge Jean Yuck to join their guild, promising more opportunities like this if he does. Jean Yuck pauses, then replies that he'll consider it once the rest of the monsters are cleared. Their conversation is interrupted by a call from Hyena. She urges Sango to look at the sky, where dark clouds have gathered, streaked with fiery lightning. Something massive and menacing lurks within the storm, radiating a threatening presence. As the massive flying monster terrorizes the city with lightning strikes from high above, it becomes clear that no skill or weapon they have can reach it. Sango suggests that they regroup at the Titan Guild headquarters, inviting Jean Yuck to join him. Reluctantly, Jean Yuck agrees, and back at the guild, they run tests to find a way to fight this airborne menace. However, every plan so far has been ineffective. They need something with exceptional firepower and long-range capabilities. Jean Yuck realizes that Lucia, with her extraordinary skills, might be able to help. Meanwhile, the Titan Guild executives are frustrated with Sango's support of a C-rank hunter like Jean Yuck. But with no other viable options and the high casualty risk of calling in a guild like Gudia, they decide to rely on Jean Yuck. Back at his apartment, Jean Yuck brings Lucia through a portal and thanks her for her help, promising her endless sweets from his world as a reward. Together, they head to the Titan Guild's rooftop, where Jean Yuck shows her the massive monster. She's confident she can take it down, given its size, but warns him that the power of her attack will require a shield to prevent collateral damage. Once Jean Yuck sets up a shield, Lucia charges her bow with immense energy, creating 2 powerful arrows. She releases the shots, producing a massive shockwave that nearly pushes Jean Yuck back even with the shield's protection. Her arrows streak through the sky and hit the monster dead on, obliterating half of its body in one shot. The remaining members of the Titan Guild watch in awe, amazed by the ease with which Jean Yuck and Lucia took down the beast. On the helipad, Lucia casually remarks that the monster was weaker than expected, though Jean Yuck realizes it's simply that Lucia is vastly overpowered for this world. Handing him a tracker that registers a huge 240-point reward, she gives him some final advice. In a world driven by greed, people can become deceptive, and he should stay vigilant. Jean Yuck thanks her, assuring her that he's aware of the dangers. As they part ways, Jean Yuck heads down to meet Sango, who's astonished at how he managed to bring down such a powerful monster. Jin Hyuk, however, plays it coy, calling it a secret. When one of the executives expresses doubt, he reveals the tracker, showing the massive point total that confirms his role in taking down the monster. Sango stops Jin Hyuk and apologizes for his outburst. Watching angrily, an executive notes that Sango keeps siding with a C rank over his own guild members. Deciding Sango is obstructing the guild's future, he makes a call to an unknown number. By the next day, rumors spread throughout the city. A giant monster was taken down by a C-rank hunter. The Titan Guild doubts the news, but verification is easy. Word even circulates that the guild master offered Jin Hyuk a direct spot in the Titan Guild, which he turned down, proof of his confidence. The Alran Guild members also hear that Don, known for his skills, was hospitalized after the invasion, allegedly by the same C-rank hunter. Alran scouts decide to find Jin Hyuk, suspecting he may have unlocked a rare hidden class. If so, they'll need to recruit him quickly or eliminate him before another guild does. Meanwhile, Jin Hyuk sleeps soundly, having exhausted his stamina. He wakes after 2 days and, noticing a mess in his living room, finds Lucia has eaten all the snacks he'd bought. Lucia explains she had no other food, and the portal to the dungeon wasn't open. This puzzles Jin Hyuk, who's always seen it open. Taking her to the attic, he shows the portal is still active, but once she steps back, it disappears. Lucia guesses the dungeon is bound to him personally and follows him, almost as if it's imprinted on him. They drop the thought, and he orders food. Lucia then asks how he returned to the house, as she cast a recognition suppression spell to keep away guild members who kept showing up. Jin Hyuk, confused as to why large guilds would seek him out, checks his phone to see the news of his battle with the giant monster spreading online. It seems his reliance on Lucia's power has thrust him into the limelight, and he knows the competitive hunter industry won't take kindly to a rising rival. After eating, they return to the dungeon to visit the dwarf with their loot. Thanks to Lucia's powerful shot, only the monster's head is usable. The old dwarf is annoyed at Lucia for damaging valuable materials, and they immediately start bickering. Jin Hyuk interrupts to ask if the dwarf can salvage anything. After examining the head, the dwarf extracts an organ that produces lightning, which he offers to use to enchant Jin Hyuk's bat. Instead of payment, the dwarf just wants Lucia out of his workshop. Jin Hyuk calms her down with a promise of more sweets, barely preventing her from lashing out. Later, while returning with Lucia's treats, he senses someone tailing him in an alleyway. Realizing he's being followed, Jin Hyuk quickly drops his groceries behind a wall and calls out to the hidden stalker. Surprised that he's been detected, the stalker reveals himself and suddenly charges at Jin Hyuk, swinging a sword. Jin Hyuk blocks just in time with his bat, leaving the attacker shocked at his reflexes, confirming the rumors. Jin Hyuk is no ordinary C rank. Jin Hyuk shoves him back and counterattacks with his bat, deciding that if this guy won't talk, he'll have to beat the answers out of him. Unable to fight head-on, the stalker turns invisible. Though Jin Hyuk can barely sense his movements, it's enough to dodge and block most strikes. Without his usual enchanted bat, which is still with the dwarf, the regular aluminum one he has isn't enough. Realizing he can't keep up the fight, Jin Hyuk retreats, but not before the stalker tags him with a tracking device. Jin Hyuk moves into a crowded area to shake him off, but the tracker keeps leading the attacker right to him. Eventually, the trail leads into a department store bathroom. The attacker, camouflaged, follows the signal to a closed stall, which he kicks open, only to find the tracker attached to the wall. Realizing he's been set up, he spins around just as Jin Hyuk lunges at him with his bat in the cramped space. The attacker barely dodges, countering with a knife swing aimed at Jin Hyuk's face, which Jin Hyuk sidesteps before grabbing the attacker's arm and slamming him to the ground. Jin Hyuk raises his bat, ready to swing one last time, demanding the assassin reveal who sent him. Outside, a young boy, desperate to use the restroom despite a sign forbidding entry, convinces his dad to let him in. As the assassin prepares to confess, he spots the boy entering. Taking advantage of the distraction, the assassin quickly charges up a fireball and hurls it at Jin Hyuk and the child. Jin Hyuk raises a shield, managing to save them both, but the smoke gives the assassin the cover he needs to escape. Thinking this mission was just meant to gather information, the assassin didn't anticipate things would escalate. But as he tries to escape, an object pierces his chest, killing him instantly. Jin-hook stands behind him, catching his breath, realizing that he may have unintentionally used too much force. As he processes what just happened, a status window pops up. It acknowledges the killing but marks it as self-defense, sparing him from the villain trait and instead offering a hidden job change. This revelation is a relief, as normally, when a hunter kills someone, they are branded with the villain trait, a harsh penalty for clerics, especially, who have their skills sealed off if they gain this title. Moments later, police arrive and secure the area. Jin-hook sits on a nearby bench, solemnly reflecting on the events. He's grateful he avoided the villain title, but the unexpected job change leaves him wondering about his future as a hunter. Jin-hook had originally feared the worst, that he'd be labeled as a villain and face severe penalties. However, since the incident was classified as self-defense, he narrowly avoided that fate. What he hadn't anticipated, though, was the hidden job change that came with it. Now, he was left to ponder the implications of this new development. As Jin-hook sat there, contemplating the situation, two detectives approached him. They began asking questions related to the incident. Jin-hook tried his best to cooperate, sticking to the truth. Fortunately, since he hadn't received the villain trait, the detectives didn't suspect foul play. They confirmed that his actions were in self-defense and decided to let him go. Before he could leave, however, the detectives warned him not to speak about the situation to anyone. Revealing anything related to the case, especially words like murder, self-defense, or villain, could cause complications for them if the wrong people found out. To ensure his silence, they handed him a device that would monitor his conversations. If he mentioned anything related to the case, the device would alert them. With that, the detectives let him go, advising him to rest and take care of himself after the shock of the incident. As Jin-hook left, the detectives exchanged glances. They were puzzled. It didn't add up that a mere C-rank hunter could be involved in such an incident, and the way he handled things, far from ordinary, only made them more suspicious of him. There was no way Jin-hook was just a C-rank hunter in their eyes. He managed to block a powerful attack from a mage while protecting a child. On top of that, he captured and killed a high-level hunter. At this point, it's more than just a rumor. Hopefully, he doesn't do anything to lose their trust. Jin-hook heads home and checks out his new class, called the Inquisitor class, which seems to build off his cleric abilities. The skills he's developed are more self-focused, letting him fight like a tank while constantly healing. It also gives him high resistance to status effects like stun and poison. With upgrades like these, he's becoming an even stronger solo hunter. He also gains the ability to see others' karma and receives power boosts based on how high it is, thanks to the judgment skill. It's almost like this class pushes him to take down bad guys. After confirming his new class abilities, he returns to the dwarf's workshop to check on his weapon. As promised, it's been enchanted to send out lightning attacks. All he has to do is think of the attack, and it releases up to 3 lightning charges, though each takes 30 minutes to recharge. Lucia is less interested in that and more focused on the fact that she can no longer sense holy power from Jin-hook. Something in the human world must have changed his status. He tells them he can't explain due to a monitoring device on him. The dwarf offers to remove it if he completes a task for him, handing Jin-hook a compass meant to guide him to a dangerous location to retrieve an item. He might be a rookie, but he should be able to handle what's to come. This task brought Jin-hook to a treacherous, mountainous path that seemed to defy physics. Using basic hiking gear, he rappelled down a seemingly bottomless pit. The old dwarf had sent him to such a dangerous place just to mine ores. While Jin-hook struggled, Lucia relaxed, teasing him for having trouble with the descent. She insisted he follow her lead closely if he wanted to avoid trouble. Lucia showed off her acrobatics, leaping down gracefully without ropes, scaling the cliffside by hand. Jin-hook sighed. He couldn't possibly match her skill. Lucia mocked him for being scared, thinking he was only holding himself back out of unnecessary fear. Without hesitation, the elf dove into the bottomless pit, unfazed as gravity did the work. Jean Hyak took a moment to consider that maybe she was right, maybe he was being too cautious. His enhanced abilities were meant for challenges like this, so he released his anxious grip on the rope and followed Lucia, free-falling after her. He decided he might as well test his limits just this once. As they neared the end of the descent, Jean used his hands and legs to slow his fall, landing unscathed beside Lucia. It dawned on him then, he was no longer an ordinary human. Lucia had known this all along, he was the only one holding himself back due to his old fears. They took a short break on a cliff edge and discussed the situation outside. Lucia expressed some concern that removing his tracking device might cause trouble, but the old dwarf had assured him it would be fine, so there must be a solution. Despite her usual disdain for the dwarf, even Lucia admitted he was reliable when it came to critical matters. Curious about Jin's new abilities, she asked about the karma values associated with his class. He revealed that her karma level was 82, the highest among the three of them, his was 64, and the dwarf's was 72. Given her rough life, Lucia wasn't too surprised by her score, though the 20-point gap between her and Jean, who'd only killed one person, amused her. In her world, she'd heard of saints who could judge good and evil at a glance, though Jean was quick to insist he was no saint. Lucia shrugged off the comparison, more interested in exploring Jin's new powers. When he asked why she cared so much, she playfully replied that she found him entertaining. But staying in an abandoned dungeon wasn't going to give them a real sense of karma values, so she proposed they head outside to experiment. Jean felt a pang of guilt for putting off the mission the dwarf had given them, but his curiosity about his abilities won out. As Lucia had pointed out, they wouldn't learn much just sitting in the dungeon. With a slight sense of regret for leaving the dwarf's task behind, he pulled out a return stone, which would instantly transport them to a location he'd marked in the outside world. Upon crushing the stone in his fingers, a dimensional rift opened up right beneath them. Lucia looked surprised for a moment but was quickly swallowed up by the portal. Strangely, using the return stone seemed to increase Jean Hyak's karma. A few moments later, they found themselves in the middle of a bustling city street. Lucia immediately got herself a drink, while Jean Hyak nervously worried that her camouflage magic wasn't hiding her well enough. She assured him that she'd concealed her true appearance, using magic to blend in with the crowd, but it was clear that the illusion of human clothing only made them stand out more. People around them couldn't take their eyes off the striking woman beside Jean Hyak. Lucia smirked, insisting that her beauty was impossible to conceal, even with camouflage magic. Jean Hyak couldn't argue. Lucia was probably the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Done with the small talk, Lucia wanted to summarize what they'd learned about karma values so far. Essentially, doing bad things increased karma. For example, Jean Hyak's karma value had just gone up by 1 point for failing to keep his promise to the old dwarf. Hurting others unnecessarily or breaking promises could raise karma. But in cases of consensual harm, like self-defense, karma values didn't increase. They still didn't know exactly what constituted high or low karma, but they did know that at 200 points, a person was officially considered a villain. Killing someone with 200 karma points wouldn't be penalized, it would be considered self-defense. Lucia explained that those who crossed the 200-point threshold were no longer regarded as human by the system. Even she and the dwarf hadn't reached 100 points, which meant you had to be quite malicious to get that high. Jean Hyak noted that he hadn't seen anyone with more than 50 karma points all day, which probably meant they were wasting their time in a relatively peaceful area. They'd need to visit a rougher part of town to see any real high karma individuals. Conveniently, there was such a place nearby, the city's red light district. As they walked through the neon-lit streets, Lucia marveled at the blaring lights in the night. She asked if people here weren't afraid of being spotted by monsters or anything. Jean Hyak explained that, unlike her world, monsters didn't wander around Earth freely. The air in the red light district was unpleasant to her elven senses, but she admitted that the lights were pretty at least. Every world had its own bright spots, after all. As they continued through the seedy streets, a shady-looking bartender approached them, immediately drawn to Lucia's beauty. He invited them to his bar, claiming they were running a special promotion where beautiful ladies could enjoy up to 5 free cocktails. Lucia simply shoved the barman aside and kept walking, but Jean Hayek grabbed her by the shoulder and told her to hold up. He insisted they should stay for a while and enjoy those free drinks. The barman's eyes lit up, and he eagerly escorted them into the establishment, promising Lucia the best service possible. After a day of seeing nothing but normal people with average karma values, Jean Hayek had finally found what he was looking for. The barman was scum, a full-blown villain with 300 karma hanging over his head. The two sat at the bar and sipped their drinks. The cocktail was sweet, and Lucia took an immediate liking to it. Meanwhile, the barman was quietly smirking, having laced their drinks with a potent paralytic poison that could immobilize a person with a single drop. Once he saw the poison seemingly taking effect, he signaled to a group of thugs on standby. They moved in, aiming to deal with Jean Hayek first, but as soon as they got close, he asked if they were sure about that plan. Thanks to his status effect resistance skill, the poison had no effect on him. Jean Hayek spun around and landed a staggering blow on one thug's jaw, sending him flying. Smiling, he realized he could finally get in some exercise. Winding up, he threw another punch that hit 2 more goons simultaneously, a 2-for-1 deal. Judging by the distance his punches sent them, the force behind his attacks was nothing short of lethal. Without letting the goons regroup, he pivoted sharply, following up with a powerful kick to another thug's face, knocking him out cold in one blow. Meanwhile, Lucia slowly opened her eyes as the effects of the paralytic poison began to wear off. She turned around, taking in the scene of thugs sprawled across the floor, courtesy of Jean Hayek. Confused, she asked what was going on. Jean Hayek casually replied that he was just taking out the trash. The barman, watching his goons get demolished, decided it was time to bring out his trump card. A hulking man with a buzz cut stepped forward, taking off his jacket to reveal bulging muscles straining against his shirt. Buzzcut charged forward with impressive speed, but Jean Hayek and Lucia only looked at him with mild disinterest. Jean Hayek locked his gaze on the man, while Lucia took another shot of the poison cocktail, asking if he needed any help. Jean Hayek declined, confident he could handle another goon on his own. Buzzcut, annoyed by their indifference, lunged forward and threw his best punch, only for Jean Hayek to catch it perfectly. No matter how much Buzzcut tried to push or struggle, he couldn't make Jean Hayek budge. This clearly meant the young man was a hunter, just like him. Buzzcut, who was used to intimidating others, was stunned to encounter someone so unfazed. Realizing he was outmatched, Buzzcut began mentally planning an escape. But before he could act, Jean Hayek tightened his grip and twisted Buzzcut's fist, breaking multiple bones in one ruthless motion. But Jean Hayek wasn't done yet. To shut Buzzcut up for good, he launched a punch squarely into the guy's mouth, sending him flying like a loose kite. Buzzcut's momentum was finally halted by a row of bar stools behind him, crashing to the ground in a heap. With every thug taken care of, the only one left was the terrified barman. Jean Hayek moved in like a predator, grabbing the barman and putting him in a chokehold that nearly crushed his windpipe. Lifting him off the ground, he cut off his air supply, all while preparing to start his interrogation. Of course, it wouldn't be effective without a few hits first. Jean Hayek landed punch after punch, painting the bar walls with the barman's blood. By the time he was done, his own fists were smeared red, and the barman's face was swollen and nearly unrecognizable. Finally, Jean Hayek began his interrogation. He knew this wasn't the first time the barman had pulled something like this. Running a shady operation like this couldn't happen without someone powerful backing him. When pressed, the barman vehemently denied having any kind of support or protection. But Jean Hayek wasn't buying it. There was no way a small-time thug could repeatedly spike drinks and abduct people without getting caught. The goons he hired must also be connected to some bigger organization. It was impossible for him to operate alone. Jean Hayek looked the barman dead in the eyes. giving him one last chance to come clean. Even after the brutal beating and threats, the barman still denied any involvement of a backer. This stubbornness meant one of two things: either he was incredibly loyal, or whoever was behind him was far scarier than anything Jean Hayak could do. To test which one it was, Jean Hayak decided to get even rougher. He grabbed one of the barman's legs and started pulling. Confused and terrified, the barman began squirming and screaming, but Jean Hayak just tightened his grip, telling him that he was simply trying to help him find the motivation to talk. The barman tried to act tough, asserting that no amount of violence would make him talk, but Jean Hayak wasn't buying it. Before he could do something even more extreme, Lucia stepped in, telling him to stop with his barbaric and complicated methods. She raised her hand, manifesting a strange, shimmering power, and brought it up to the barman's face. Instantly, the man's demeanor shifted from defiance to a weirdly relaxed state, his face loosening, though he remained as ugly as ever. As Lucia's mysterious power infiltrated his mind, a few moments of silence passed. Then, suddenly, his expression twisted into a crazed grin as he muttered something insane. He started rambling, asking if the duo was sent by an organization called Alron. He laughed maniacally, insisting that no matter what Alron tried, it was already too late. Whatever Lucia did had turned him into a babbling mess, spilling information she hadn't expected. The barman continued, claiming that Alron was irrelevant because his Tyrant Guild would massacre all their enemies. Just like that, Jean Hayak and Lucia had discovered the power behind this criminal operation, the Tyrant Guild. Jean Hayak realized the situation was far more serious than he initially thought. He pressed the crazed barman, asking what made him so confident Tyrant could overpower their enemies. The slobbering villain grinned and replied simply, "We have Alron's elixir." That answer only confused Jean Hayak further, as he had no idea what the barman was talking about. Moments later, police sirens blared outside the bar, forcing Jean Hayak and Lucia to slip away unnoticed. The two of them had inadvertently uncovered a massive conspiracy involving a powerful guild pulling strings from the shadows. As they walked, Lucia explained that Alron's elixir was a dangerous drug that doubled the user's stats, but it required the sacrifice of young women to produce. She was horrified that a guild on Earth would create something so twisted. In her world, a similar substance called the Queen's Tear existed, made by sacrificing countless lives. One of Lucia's close friends had been taken as fertilizer for the elixir when they were young. Years later, once she reached platinum rank, Lucia personally wiped out the organization responsible. No wonder she had worn a grim expression since they left the bar. The pressing question now was what to do next. With the barman's admission that Tyrant Guild was close to completing the elixir, they needed to act fast and stop them before it was ready. Back at the bar, after the police had cleared the scene, a shadowy figure in black entered, reporting to his superiors. He wore a mask and glasses, concealing half of his face. After investigating, he concluded that this wasn't an internal dispute. The barman had been killed in a way no ally or rival guild would use. His next orders were clear: find out who had interrupted their operation and deal with them, swiftly. The masked man was confident he could track down the perpetrators in no time. Meanwhile, across the globe, the Titan Guild's top brass was on an overseas business trip. According to the ever-competent secretary, Lee Hyena, the Titan Guild's business trip to Hong Kong had yielded excellent results. If their first-half performance continued on this trajectory, they might even consider recruiting 15% more guild members. The guild was thriving, yet Titan Guild leader Seo Sango was far from pleased. His mind was occupied with unsettling news about Alron's elixir. As expected, Lee Hyena hadn't heard of such a thing. The association had worked hard to keep its existence hidden from the public. With pressing guild business keeping Hyena overseas for the time being, Sango realized he'd need to handle the situation alone for now. He instructed his secretary to issue an urgent, confidential order to the guild. Effective immediately, the Titan Guild would be declaring a hostile stance toward the Tyrant Guild. War was coming. Shocked by the abrupt and drastic decision, Lee Hyena asked for more information before they launched the entire guild into such a serious conflict. All Sango would say was that if they didn't prepare now, the chaos that would ensue later would be far worse. If the information he'd received was accurate, waiting would only leave them vulnerable when it was too late to act. Hyena pressed him, wanting to know what kind of information had provoked him to make such an uncharacteristically impulsive decision. Sango, usually the cautious type, assured her that both the Alran Guild and even the government would stand with them when the time came. But Hyena still had her reservations. War brought risks for everyone involved. She suggested they consult the guild executives first to make a more measured decision, but Sango had already made up his mind. His thoughts were clearer than ever, and he didn't have time for long meetings and debates. Seeing the determination in his eyes, Hyena understood there was no changing his mind. Although she was uncomfortable with acting on such limited information, she trusted Sango's instincts. He instructed her to issue the order confidentially within the guild and to start quiet investigations, saving the official announcement for later. As for the internal probe, Sango already had a few individuals he wanted to look into more closely. What had prompted this sudden shift in Sango, you ask? It was a single text message from Jean Hyak, warning him of Tyrant's plan to create the inhumane drug using human sacrifices. Meanwhile, Lucia was lounging in Jean Hyak's apartment, munching on sweets and nagging him about his plans. She was relieved to hear that there were still level-headed and trustworthy people in this world, like Seo Sango. If no one had agreed to join forces to take down the Tyrant Guild, she would have handled it herself. She had no patience for organizations as despicable as Tyrant, especially knowing the horrific, inhumane methods they were using to create Alran's elixir. Jean Hyak asked when she'd go back to the dungeon instead of depleting his pantry all day, but she just laughed and said she wasn't about to miss out on a raid against a villainous guild. Lucia figured that the Tyrant Guild couldn't be ordinary hunters if they were crazy enough to concoct something so sinister. Even Jean Hyak had to admit he couldn't handle such a large organization on his own, at least not yet. Lucia officially offered her help in taking down the Tyrant Guild together, and Jean Hyak thanked her, even though she didn't have to step in. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, followed by someone calling out Jean Hyak's name. He wasn't expecting anyone, so this was a surprise. Maybe it was a delivery, or perhaps something more ominous. In fact, it turned out to be the masked man sent to investigate the bar incident. Using a magical compass that tracked people through blood, he'd traced Jean Hyak by following the faint traces left on him from the bar. The masked man moved through the city's rooftops, leaping from building to building with practiced ease, until he finally landed in front of Jean Hyak's apartment building. As he pinpointed the direction of the blood trace, he stared at the modest home. For a moment, the house looked hazy, almost as if obscured by a spell, but he shook it off as a trick of his imagination. He remembered hearing that this was the home of the hunter who'd taken down the Leviathan recently, which made him suspect the two incidents might be connected. Not that it mattered, he had a job to do. Conjuring a long, sinister-looking needle out of thin air, he prepared to confront his target. Meanwhile, Jean Hyak approached the door and asked who was outside. The masked man calmly replied that he had a late delivery due to an accident. Jean Hyak wasn't fooled. No delivery would arrive this late, and his home was protected by a recognition suppression spell, making it nearly impossible to locate. If someone had managed to overcome that spell, they were definitely up to no good. Cautiously, Jean Hyak opened the door, ready for trouble. The masked man immediately tried to force his way inside, brandishing the dark needle. But Jean Hyak was prepared, catching the intruder's hand before the needle could reach him. With a smirk, he asked if deliveries came with poison darts as a bonus now. Caught off guard, the masked man was momentarily stunned. Just then, Lucia appeared and quickly fired an arrow with incredible speed and force, urging Jean Hyak to move aside. At such close range, the masked man couldn't dodge. The arrow pierced his body, sending him flying out of the second-story window, bleeding heavily as the projectile lodged deep in his flesh. Lucia notched another arrow and told Jean Hyak to step aside so she could finish him off, but Jean Hayak waved her off, insisting on dealing with the masked man himself. He reasoned that the intruder was probably here because of the bar incident. Lucia warned him that the attacker wasn't ordinary if he'd managed to survive one of her arrows. Outside, the masked man struggled to pull out the arrow, shivering as he realized the woman upstairs had nearly killed him with a single shot. He yanked the arrow tip out, he bled all over the pavement. Every instinct told the masked man to retreat. By the time Jean Hack tried to catch up, the masked figure was already doing his best injured parkour across the neighboring rooftops. Lucia asked if Jean Hack wanted to give chase, but he found it too troublesome. The bastard would just come after him again later. They could settle things another time. What interested Jean Hack more was the masked man's karma value, a staggering 900. This was someone who killed without remorse, and Jean Hack was itching to go up against a real villain. This encounter might turn out to be useful down the line. The next day, Jean Hack and Lucia were escorted by a Tyrant Guild vehicle to a remote investigation site in the mountains. The driver pointed out the destination, which they were visiting under Guild leader Sango's personal instructions. However, it was no secret that some people in the Tyrant Guild still weren't fond of Jean Hack. Scanning the assembled troops, Jean Hack estimated that at least half were A-rank hunters or higher, an elite group, to be sure. Leading the operation was none other than Han Yong-sak, the executive who had once tried to pick a fight with Jean Hack. Right from the start, Jean Hack had a bad feeling that this mission was going to get annoying quickly. Sak formally introduced himself as the head of the operation and, to Jean Hack's surprise, brought up their previous encounter during the last airstrike. Jean Hack commented on the executive's sudden change in personality, as Sak seemed much more polite and friendly today. Clearing his throat, Sak awkwardly apologized for his behavior from before, explaining he'd just been a little too enthusiastic about his duties to the guild. He hoped this wouldn't affect their work together on this mission. Sak then asked about the woman accompanying Jean Hack. Jean introduced Lucia as a skilled colleague who wouldn't be a hindrance, though her presence seemed to rattle Sak, as there had been no mention of additional personnel. Before Sak could protest, the recon team returned. Sak excused himself to receive the report. Although he had apologized, it was clear he still looked down on Jean Hack and Lucia, likely assuming they were mere C-rank nobodies. It didn't matter to him how strong they actually were, he had his own agenda for this mission. Lucia quickly sensed the executive's duplicitous nature and asked Jean Hack if they were really going to let this guy lead. He assured her it would be fine. Besides, they had both noticed that someone had been tailing them for a while now. Jean Hack decided to let this pursuer continue, as they might prove useful later. Before the raid began, Jean Hack handed Lucia a magical crystal, a communication device with a 10 kilometers range. They'd need it later, so he told her to keep it close. Soon, Sak returned with confirmation of the initial reports. The Tyrant Guild was indeed involved in human trafficking. For the plan of attack, Sak turned to Jean Hack with a request. The recon team had discovered a strong barrier surrounding the building, and they believed there was only one person capable of breaching it undetected. Sak suggested that Jean Hack was the perfect candidate to sneak through. Jean Hack didn't hold back, calling him out for essentially requesting a suicide mission behind enemy lines. The executive kept up his act as an impartial team leader, even sarcastically claiming that only the man who took down the Leviathan could handle this stealth mission. Besides, he argued, it would be easier for Jean Hack to work alone rather than with unfamiliar Tyrant Guild members. It was obvious that Han Yong-sak was just piling all the risks onto Jean Hack, pushing him into danger without hesitation. They might think they were getting one over on Jean Hack, but this was exactly the situation he'd been hoping for. Soon after, Jean Hack joined a select team of Tyrant Guild hunters to reach the barrier's weak point. The plan was simple. The magic team would create a small breach, giving him a brief window to slip inside. They arrived at the eastern side of the facility, where the magic team began working to create the breach. This team wasn't very capable, they could only hold the gap open for a few seconds, so Jean Hack had to act fast. Without any delay, he dashed forward and slipped through the barrier, eager to see what secrets the Tyrant Guild was hiding in these mountains. Once inside, Jean-Hack summoned his trusty bat and looked around. The interior of the base was entirely different from what he'd seen outside. The barrier had a distortion effect that disguised the facility's true appearance. His first objective was to locate the main entrance to the base. As he moved through the area, he noticed something odd. There were far fewer guards than expected. Eventually, he spotted a guard posted near an entrance by the barrier. Assuming this was a good lead, Jean-Hack leapt into the air, raised his bat, and swung with all his might. To his surprise, the guard vanished into smoke upon impact. It had been an illusion. Frustrated, he realized he couldn't rely on capturing a guard to get more information. As he approached the door, he was surprised to see it slide open automatically, like something out of a supermarket. The facility's defenses were laughably lax, and there were no visible security cameras. It was as if they believed no one would dare to break in, or perhaps they simply didn't expect any of the abducted women to escape. Just to be safe, Jean-Hack pulled out an EMP generator from his inventory, made from electric-type monster materials, and set it on the floor. This would disable any communication or security devices in the area. He'd given Lucia a magical communication crystal for backup, so he wasn't worried about cutting off his own communications. With the EMP activated, Jean-Hack planned his next steps, ready to start his real mission. From a distance, the masked man who had tracked him since the bar incident watched closely. He was starting to connect the dots between Jean-Hack's involvement with the bar fight and his ties to the Titan Guild. The masked man had his own hidden agenda, and it seemed Jean-Hack played a crucial role in it. Thanks to the EMP, one of the facility guards lost power on his phone, interrupting his game. Grumbling about the remote countryside affecting his signal, he didn't notice Jean-Hack approaching. Before the guard could react, Jean-Hack's red bat smashed into his face, knocking him out cold. Jean-Hack hadn't even swung the bat, he'd thrown it, using its blunt tip to take down the guard. After confirming the guard was unconscious, he used his auto-recovery skill to recall the bat. Blood splattered on the nearby wall as the guard's body hit the floor. Jean-Hack examined him and saw that, though he wasn't a hunter, the man had a whopping 800 karma value. It was clear now, this place was crawling with vile, inhuman criminals. Jean-Hack felt no hesitation about wiping out everyone involved in this operation. Entering through a newly unlocked gate, he found himself in a long hallway lined with prison doors. This was clearly where they were keeping the abducted women. The living conditions were horrific, each cell was filthy, and the women were chained like animals, waiting to be used as sacrifices for that cursed elixir. Jean-Hack's grim thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling out to him. In one of the cells, instead of a woman, he saw a man dressed in the uniform of the Tyrant Guild. The prisoner warned Jean-Hack to leave before it was too late, claiming everyone in the facility had already gone insane. Outside, the scummy team leader, Han Yong-sak, glanced at his watch, timing Jean-Hack's infiltration. It had been a while since the young man went in, and things were still quiet. Maybe it was time to advance the main force too. Sak ordered his men to get into position, ready to breach the facility if anything unusual happened. As soon as he gave the go signal, the Titan hunters charged forward in their black jackets, swarming like flies. Lucia, however, remained where she was, calm and observant. Sak couldn't figure out her deal, but he didn't press. Sak eventually joined his men in the standby zone, leaving Jean-Hack to handle the infiltration alone. Meanwhile, Lucia watched the Titans carefully. Before the mission, Jean-Hack had asked her to let him handle the situation inside by himself, while her job was to monitor the Titan hunters outside. They didn't trust Han Yong-sak, so Lucia needed to stay alert. Though Jean-Hack had warned her not to get too involved, that wasn't exactly her style. Inside the facility, Jean-Hack found himself in conversation with the prisoner, who introduced himself as Young Dun. Curious, Jean-Hack asked why a Tyrant Guild member would be locked up like this. Dun explained that he had tried to kill Alone herself. They kept him alive only because of his expertise in illusion magic, skills that powered the barrier's distortion effect and the fake guard illusions. Jinhak asked what would drive Dun to sabotage his own guild's research. Dun's answer was simple: he couldn't stand watching his guildmates sacrifice innocent women to monsters as bait. He'd reached his limit and attempted to assassinate alone but was caught and imprisoned. Jinhak was surprised to see a Tyrant Guild member with a conscience. Even Dun's karma score was low, only at 62. Seeing potential in him, Jinhak invited Dun to join forces to take down the facility. Meanwhile, the guard assigned to monitor the control room finally woke up, groggy and slumped in his chair. He usually got sleepy at this hour, and nothing ever happened in this place, so he thought nothing of it. But today was different. Instead of seeing live feeds of the facility, he woke up to black screens. Panicking, he realized something was terribly wrong. Trying to reboot the system, he found it unresponsive. The power source had been fried by Jinhak's EMP. Every electronic device, including smartphones, was down, leaving the entire facility's security offline. Just outside the command center, a few tyrant guards were playing cards to pass the time. Their game was interrupted by the control room guard, who burst out yelling about an emergency. Annoyed at first, the guards quickly grew alarmed when they heard that the entire system was offline. To make matters worse, every prison cell had been opened, and the women were escaping. The facility was in chaos. The team leaders split their forces. One team headed to the elixir production room, while the other began searching for the intruder and the escaping women. Meanwhile, the control room guard was tasked with finding a way to contact headquarters by any means necessary. Inside, Dun led the freed women through the labyrinthine corridors, guiding them towards the nearest exit. They were close to freedom, but tyrant guards soon caught up, blocking their escape route. Recognizing Dun as he directed the women, the guards charged in. Without hesitation, Dun stayed behind, facing down his former guildmates to buy the women more time. The absolute hero let the women pass, standing his ground to hold off the tyrant guards and ensuring their path to freedom. Tyrant Thug number 1, too eager and full of rage, rushed at Dun alone, swearing to kill him once and for all. Just as the punch connected, Dun smirked and vanished, reminding his former comrades of his specialty, illusions. Tyrant Thug 1 cursed, realizing he'd fallen for such a basic trick. Meanwhile, as Team 2 chased Dun and the escaping women, Team 1 was meeting a far worse fate. Each member of Team 1 had only a measly knife, which was no match for Jinhak and his trusty baseball bat. With superior technique and footwork, Jinhak dispatched these low-level fighters effortlessly, knocking them out with one swing each. By the time he finished off the last thug, he hadn't even broken a sweat. Judging by their desperate attempt to guard the gate, it was clear Alone herself was hiding behind it. Jinhak pushed open the door and stepped into the room, taking in the horrific sight. The Tyrant Guild had gone to extreme lengths to hide this massive underground lab, where human-sized test tubes filled with abducted women lined the walls. Each woman was suspended in the tubes, an unwilling participant in this twisted experiment. Jinhak's stomach turned as he realized the scale of this operation was even more vile than he'd imagined. At the center of the lab, encased in a protective glass chamber, was a monstrous figure. It had to be Alone, the source of all this horror. Jinhak gripped his bat tightly. The creature didn't seem to notice him, possibly asleep within her containment. Smirking, he called on the lightning that dwelled within his weapon, taking a practiced batting stance. If his strike landed, he could end this nightmare in one swing. But things were never that easy. Sensing the danger, Alone stirred, shattering the protective glass and hurling tentacles toward him with terrifying speed. Jinhak had to dodge and weave as the deadly appendages aimed for his vital spots, forcing him to cancel his lightning strike. He studied the movements, realizing how heavy and fast those tentacles were. One wrong move, and it would be over. Right now, all he could do was stay on the defensive, searching for any opening to counterattack. Forcing himself to stay calm, Jinhak locked in, focusing entirely on the battle at hand. For anyone expecting a cute tentacle girl, think again. Alone looked like a twisted, monstrous creature, more akin to a crackhead with nightmarish tentacles. She fully broke free from her glass chamber, sending shards flying in every direction. As Gene Hack dodged, it became clear that this time, he was truly outclassed.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more Manhwa recaps every week. Hit that bell icon so you never miss the latest chapters and stories from your favorite Manhwa series.